Two black belts cornered the wrong man between a tool chest and a hydraulic lift, claiming they'd been overcharged for a brake job. One shoved. One filmed. The younger one grabbed a tire iron. What they didn't know was that the grease-stained mechanic, watching their feet, had spent 12 years doing things in Helmand Province that most people can't even imagine. They were about to find out in the worst way possible until their own sensei pulled into the lot, saw my face through the open bay door, and went completely pale. My name is Ray Decker isn't relevant. What matters is that I spent 12 years as a Special Operations Marine, ran 2 combat deployments, and came home wanting exactly one thing: silence. I found it in a 2-bay garage on the edge of a small town, doing honest work with my hands. No rank, no call sign, no one knowing what I used to be. That anonymity was the whole point. The Decker brothers were about to shatter every bit of it. And the question nobody in that garage thought to ask before things escalated was simple: who exactly had they decided to corner? I opened the garage 6 years ago with a name I borrowed from my grandfather, Colton's Auto and Repair, and a toolbox I bought secondhand off a retired rail worker in Knoxville. I had no business plan. I had no grand vision. I had 2 bays, a hydraulic lift older than most of my customers, and the kind of mechanical intuition that comes from stripping military vehicles in the dark under fire because you had exactly no other option. The town is small, the kind of place where everybody knows your truck before they know your name. I kept to myself. I fixed what needed fixing, charged fair prices, and went home to a house that was quiet in all the ways I needed it to be. I didn't join the VFW post. I didn't go to the Friday night football games. I wasn't unfriendly. I just understood that proximity to people eventually means proximity to problems, and I had spent enough of my 20s surrounded by problems. For the first 5 years, that arrangement worked. Then the Decker brothers showed up. Marcus and Tyler Decker were local fixtures in the way that loud, confident young men tend to become local fixtures. Everywhere at once, impossible to ignore, and convinced the town was a stage built specifically for their benefit. Marcus was 28. Tyler was 25. They had grown up 2 counties over and moved here when their sensei, a man named Garrett Webb, opened a dojo on the main strip 3 years back. They trained under Webb 6 days a week and had been black belts long enough to have forgotten what it felt like not to be one. That is a specific and dangerous kind of forgetting. I had seen them around. Hard not to. They drove a lifted Silverado with a custom wrap on the hood, the kanji symbol for strength printed large enough to be readable from a moving vehicle. They wore their dojo shirts to the hardware store, to the diner, everywhere. Marcus had a habit of standing too close to people during conversations. Tyler had a habit of filming things on his phone. Together they operated like a unit that had never once been genuinely tested. And that combination, the confidence, the training, the audience of one filming everything, made them exactly the kind of problem I had spent 6 years trying to avoid. They brought the Silverado in on a Thursday morning in late October. The brake job was straightforward. Front rotors were warped. Rear pads were worn to metal. One caliper was sticking on the driver's side. I gave them an honest quote. They approved it. I did the work. When Marcus came to pick it up, he looked at the invoice, looked at me, and decided the number was too high. I walked him through every line item: parts costs, labor hours, the caliper replacement he hadn't anticipated. I showed him the worn hardware I'd pulled off the truck. It was a reasonable invoice for a complete brake service on a heavy lifted vehicle. Any shop in a 50-mile radius would have charged the same or more. Marcus wasn't interested in the line items. He handed the invoice to Tyler, who filmed it. Then Marcus leaned against the tool chest near Bay 2 and told me I was running a scam. He said it the way people say things when they've never been told no. Casually, like it was already decided, like the conversation was a formality before I handed him a refund. I said I wasn't running anything. I said the invoice was accurate and I'd be happy to show him the parts I'd replaced if he wanted to verify the work. He said he didn't need to verify anything. He knew what these jobs cost. What happened in the next 4 minutes is the part I want you to understand clearly, because it explains everything that came after. Marcus stepped away from the tool chest and positioned himself between me and the open bay door. Tyler circled around the front of the truck. I was standing in the narrow space between the hydraulic lift and my rolling tool cabinet. About 6 feet of floor, a grease-stained concrete floor, and nowhere obvious to go. I noticed the positioning immediately. It was deliberate. They had done this before, or something like it. 2 men, 1 target, limited exit options. Maybe it had always worked. Maybe every previous disagreement had folded before it reached this point, because most people, when they feel physically cornered, start looking for the fastest way to de-escalate. I didn't feel cornered. I felt something closer to very, very tired. I kept my hands open and empty at my sides. I watched their feet the way I used to watch doorways in Songen. Not their faces, not their hands, their feet. Because feet tell you what someone is about to do before their brain has finished deciding. Marcus was shifting his weight forward. Tyler had stopped filming the invoice and was now filming me. I told them the invoice stood. I told them I'd be willing to call the parts supplier directly and verify the cost on record if they wanted a third-party confirmation. My voice was flat, not aggressive, not apologetic. Flat in the way that comes from years of learning how to speak to people in high-stress environments without adding fuel. Marcus didn't want a third-party confirmation. He shoved me, one hand, open palm, against my chest, hard enough that I stepped back half a step and my shoulder blades touched the tool cabinet. Tyler kept filming. I looked at Marcus Decker and I made a decision. The decision was that I was not going to let 2 men who had never once faced a consequence pin me against a wall in my own garage over an honest invoice, but I also was not going to hurt them. Not over this. They were young, they were stupid, and they had not yet learned that the world contains people who know exactly what they are capable of and choose every single day not to demonstrate it. I kept my hands open. I watched their feet. I said nothing. Then Tyler reached behind him and pulled a tire iron off the rack near the bay door. And that was the moment, the exact specific moment, when the situation changed completely. There is a specific cognitive shift that happens when a situation crosses from confrontational into genuinely dangerous. Most people feel it as panic, the heart rate spikes, the vision narrows, the body floods with adrenaline in a way that makes rational decision-making nearly impossible. What they don't teach you in most self-defense courses, what you can only learn through thousands of hours of high-stress training and repeated real-world exposure, is how to ride that adrenaline instead of drowning in it. How to let the chemical response sharpen you rather than scatter you. The moment Tyler's hand closed around that tire iron, I felt the shift, and I was ready for it in a way he could not have anticipated. I did not move. That is the first thing people get wrong when they imagine these situations. They picture the trained person exploding into action the moment a weapon appears. That is not how it works. Movement draws movement. If I had lunged or stepped back or raised my hands, I would have triggered a response from Marcus, who was still positioned between me and the bay door. 2 men, 1 weapon, a confined space. The last thing I wanted was chaos. Chaos favors the aggressive party. Controlled stillness favors the man who knows exactly where he is and exactly what he is prepared to do. So I stood still. And I assessed. Tyler was holding the tire iron low, not raised. That told me he wasn't committed to swinging it. Not yet. He was using it as a prop, a pressure tool, the way someone puts a hand on a holster without drawing. It was a threat display, effective against most people. Against someone who has been in environments where weapons appear regularly and decisions get made in fractions of seconds, it reads differently. It reads as hesitation. And hesitation is information. Marcus, for his part, was watching my face. That was his mistake. He was looking for fear, for the micro-expressions that tell an aggressor they have won the psychological battle before the physical one begins. He didn't find what he was looking for. I know what my face does under pressure. It does very little. Years of mission briefings where the stakes were measured in human lives taught me to keep my expression neutral in the same way breathing is neutral, automatically, without effort. I said very quietly that putting the tire iron back on the rack was the smartest thing Tyler could do right now. Marcus laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound designed to communicate that he was in control of the room. He told me I had a lot of nerve for a man in my position. He said his brother had every right to hold whatever he wanted in his own hands. I told him it wasn't his garage. The laugh stopped. Here is what I want you to understand about the Decker brothers, because it matters to everything that happened next. Marcus and Tyler were not bad people in the way that truly dangerous people are bad. They were not calculating. They were not predatory in any deep considered sense. They were young men who had been handed a specific identity, trained fighters, respected students of a disciplined martial art, and who had learned, over years of unchallenged behavior, that the identity alone was usually enough. They had walked into situations like this before and walked out having gotten what they wanted, because the person on the other side of the argument did the math and decided no invoice was worth a physical confrontation with two black belts. That math made sense. For most people, it was the correct calculation. They had never once done the math on what happens when the person across from them has spent 12 years in an environment where physical confrontation is not a last resort, not a special occasion, not something to be avoided at significant personal cost. They had never accounted for the possibility that the other person's threshold, the internal line between restraint and response, was calibrated on a completely different scale. I watched Tyler's grip on the tire iron. I watched Marcus's weight distribution. I tracked the distance between us, the angle to the bay door, the position of the hydraulic lift to my right. In my head, I was running the scenario the way I used to run building entries. Every variable, every possible outcome, prioritized by likelihood and consequence. If Marcus moved first, I would deal with him before Tyler could swing. If Tyler raised the iron, I would step inside the arc where the leverage disappears. If both moved simultaneously, I had a very short window, and I intended to use it cleanly and decisively. None of that is bravado. I am not telling you this to impress you. I am telling you because that internal process, that calm, systematic threat assessment running in the background, is what kept me standing still instead of escalating a situation that two young men with insufficient information were walking straight into. And then a truck pulled into the lot. I heard it before I saw it. A diesel engine, heavier than the Silverado, pulling in off the main road at low speed. Through the open bay door, I could see it in my peripheral vision without turning my head. A dark green pickup, clean, well-maintained, moving carefully into the lot like the driver wasn't sure of the situation inside. Marcus heard it too. He glanced toward the bay door for half a second. That was enough. The glance told me he hadn't been expecting anyone. This wasn't a coordinated arrival. Whoever had just pulled up was not part of what the Decker brothers had planned. The truck stopped. The engine cut. A door opened. I heard boots on gravel, slow and deliberate, and then a man appeared in the open bay doorway. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, lean, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of physical discipline. He was wearing a plain gray jacket and work pants, no dojo shirt, no insignia. He looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like a man who had simply pulled in to ask about an oil change. His eyes found me immediately. Not Marcus, not Tyler and the tire iron. Me, and every ounce of color drained from his face. I knew Garrett Webb, not from the dojo on the main strip, not from around town. I knew Garrett Webb from Helmand Province, 2009, when he was a Navy corpsman attached to my unit during the worst stretch of that deployment. He had been 24 years old, and he had pulled a man out of a burning vehicle under direct fire in a moment that I watched happen from 15 feet away and have not forgotten once in the years since. He was the kind of corpsman that Marines talk about the way people talk about things they never quite believed they survived, with a specific, quiet reverence that doesn't need to be stated out loud. He had left the Navy the year after that deployment. I had heard through the loose network of people who stay in touch and people who don't that he'd gone back to school, gotten involved in martial arts, eventually built something legitimate. I had not expected to find him here, in this town, with these two particular young men as his students. From the look on his face, he had not expected to find me here either. The garage went very still. Marcus turned to look at his sensei. Tyler lowered the tire iron, not deliberately, not as a conscious decision, but in the automatic way that a person's body responds when authority suddenly and unexpectedly enters the room. The iron dropped back toward his side. His grip loosened. Webb didn't move from the doorway. He stood there for a long moment, and I could see him processing, taking in the positions of his students, the confined space, the tire iron in Tyler's hand, and me standing against the tool cabinet with my hands open and empty at my sides. He was reading the situation the way trained people read situations, and the conclusion he was reaching was written all over his face. He had gone pale because he understood something his students did not. He understood that they had been about 30 seconds from the worst decision of their lives. Webb's voice, when it came, was quiet, almost gentle. He said the brothers' names, Marcus first, then Tyler, and he used a tone I recognized from the field. Not anger, not alarm. The flat, controlled register of someone who needs compliance immediately and knows that volume is the wrong tool to get it. He told them to put the iron down and step away. Marcus started to say something. He turned to Webb with the expression of a young man who has never been overruled by his mentor and isn't sure how to process it. He started to explain the invoice, the argument, the position he felt he was taking on principle. Webb cut him off with 2 words: step away. There was something in the way he said it that closed the door on further discussion. Marcus looked at me. He looked at Webb. He stepped back. Tyler set the tire iron on the ground near the base of the lift, and the sound of it touching concrete was the loudest thing in the garage. Webb walked through the bay door slowly, his boots crossing the grease-stained floor, his eyes still on me. When he got close enough that his students couldn't hear clearly, he stopped. He looked at me for a long moment the way you look at something you thought was behind you, something you filed away in the category of the past, of another life, of a version of events that ended and stayed ended. He said my old call sign. 1 word, barely above a whisper. I hadn't heard that name in 6 years. He told his students, and this is the part that Marcus Decker has apparently not stopped thinking about since, because word travels in small towns, and I heard this secondhand from 3 different sources in the weeks that followed. He told them to get in the truck before they made the worst mistake of their lives. But what Webb said to me, standing alone in that garage after the Silverado pulled out of the lot, is something I haven't repeated to many people. Because what he told me in the next 10 minutes changed the way I understood not just that afternoon, but the entire previous 3 years of my life in this town, and it raised a question I had no idea how to answer. Webb waited until the sound of the Silverado's engine faded out onto the main road. Then he pulled the bay door down halfway, not all the way, leaving a stripe of afternoon light across the concrete floor, and he turned to me with his hands in his jacket pockets and that look on his face that I remembered from the field. The look of a man about to say something he has been carrying for longer than he wanted to. He asked me how long I had been here. I told him. 6 years. He nodded, like that number confirmed something he had already suspected. He said he had moved to town 3 years ago. He said he had found the garage inside of his first week, hard not to notice the only independent shop in a town this size, and he had seen my name on the sign out front and stood in the parking lot for a long moment trying to decide whether to come in. He didn't come in. I asked him why. He said he figured I had chosen this place for a reason, that if I had wanted to be found, I would have reached out through the network. He respected that. He understood the specific kind of quiet that a person builds after the kind of work we had done, and he didn't want to be the one to disturb it. So for 3 years, he had known I was here, and he had said nothing. He had trained his students, run his dojo, lived his life 2 miles from my garage, and kept the information locked away with the same discipline that made him good at everything else he applied himself to. And then his students decided to dispute a break invoice. I will be honest with you, My first response to learning that Webb had known and said nothing for 3 years was not gratitude. It was a complicated feeling that I did not have a clean name for, something adjacent to the sensation of finding out a lock you trusted has always been unlocked. The anonymity I had built wasn't as solid as I thought. Someone knew. Someone had always known. And the fact that he had respected my privacy, as considerate as that was, meant that the decision about whether I stayed invisible had been partly in someone else's hands the whole time. But that feeling moved through quickly, because what Webb said next made it irrelevant. He told me that Tyler's phone had been filming the whole time. I already knew that. I had watched Tyler film the invoice, film my face, track the confrontation from behind his brother's shoulder. I had noted it the way you note all variables in a confined situation and filed it accordingly. What I did not know, what Webb had found out 20 minutes before he pulled into my lot, which was why he had come, was that Tyler had been posting clips to a regional Facebook group throughout the morning, not just from today. Tyler had a habit of filming and posting confrontations. He ran a page with a few thousand followers built around exactly this kind of content. The brothers walking into situations, pushing until something happened, filming the reaction. It had started small. An argument at a hardware store. A dispute at a restaurant. Each clip got a few hundred views, then a few thousand. The brake job clip was different. He had posted it in segments, with commentary. The first clip was Marcus presenting the invoice and calling it a scam. The second was Marcus's shove, framed from an angle that made it look like I had stepped toward him first. The third was the two of them positioning around me with a caption that I will not repeat because the language was designed to provoke and it worked exactly as intended. By the time Webb saw it, the third clip had 40,000 views and was climbing. Let me sit with that for a moment, because this is the part where the story stops being about a billing dispute and becomes something else entirely. I had spent 6 years building a life structured specifically around invisibility. No social media presence. No digital footprint beyond what a business license requires. Cash transactions where possible. A deliberately low profile in a small town where low profiles are relatively easy to maintain. That structure was not paranoia. It was a considered response to the reality that people who have done the kind of work I did sometimes attract attention they did not invite, from directions they did not expect. In the span of a single morning, 2 young men with a phone and a grudge had cracked that structure open and posted the pieces to 40,000 strangers. And it was about to get significantly worse. Webb pulled out his own phone and showed me the comments on the third clip. I do not spend time on social media, so I had no framework for how quickly something like that moves. The comments were not just reactions to the video. People were trying to identify me, not maliciously, mostly, in the way that crowds online attempt to solve puzzles. Someone had caught the partial name on the garage sign in the background of the first clip. Someone else had run it, found the business registration, found my name attached to it. A third person had cross-referenced the name against military records databases, the kind that are partially public, that list discharge status and branch and general service period without getting into operational specifics. Within 2 hours of the first post, there were people in the comments who knew I was a veteran. Within 3 hours, someone had connected the unit designation they found in a public record to the broader category of what that unit did, and the comment section had shifted from a billing dispute into something with a very different energy. The word that kept appearing in various forms and tones was, "What did he do in the service?" That question, spreading across 40,000 views and climbing, was the thing Webb had driven over to warn me about. Not the brothers. Not the tire iron. The question. Because Webb knew, better than almost anyone alive outside of classified files, exactly what the honest answer to that question looked like. And he knew what happens when that kind of information starts circulating in environments with no context, no framing, and no one qualified to explain it. I asked Webb what he thought I should do. He said he wasn't sure. He said he had been trying to figure that out on the drive over. He said there was a version where I did nothing, let the video cycle through its natural lifespan. which for most regional content is 48 to 72 hours before something else takes its place. Let the comments exhaust themselves. Let the curiosity dissolve without feeding it. There was a real argument for that path. But there was a problem with that path, and Webb named it before I could. Marcus and Tyler Decker had a father. Raymond Decker Sr. had lived in this county his entire life. He owned property, several parcels, including the building where Webb leased his dojo space. He sat on 2 civic boards, had long-standing relationships with local law enforcement at the social level, and had a specific and well-documented history of responding to situations involving his sons the way a man responds when he has never once allowed a consequence to reach them. He did not call lawyers. Generally, he made phone calls. He showed up. He applied pressure in the particular way that a man with local roots and local leverage can apply pressure when he decides someone has wronged his family. Webb had already gotten a call from him. 40 minutes ago, while Webb was still at the dojo processing what Tyler had posted online, Raymond Decker Sr. had called to inform him that his sons had been assaulted by a customer and that he expected the matter to be handled appropriately. Webb had told him he would look into it. Then Webb had gotten in his truck and driven to my garage. I turned that over for a moment. The shape of the situation had changed significantly in the past 20 minutes. What had started as a billing dispute with 2 young men who overplayed a weak hand had become, through no escalation on my part, a multi-front problem. There was a video with a growing audience asking questions I did not want answered publicly. There was a father with local influence who had already begun framing the narrative in a direction that inverted the actual sequence of events. And there was the footage itself, which I had not seen, but which Webb described as edited in a way that compressed the timeline and removed the shove in the tire iron from clear view. I am not a man who panics, but I will tell you that standing in that garage, listening to Webb lay out the dimensions of the problem, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not fear. Closer to the specific frustration of watching a situation develop in a direction you did not choose and cannot fully control, while the clock runs on decisions that need to be made before the landscape shifts again. Webb asked me a question then. He asked it carefully, the way he used to ask things in the field when he was checking on a man's state of mind without making it clinical about it. He asked if there was anything about my current situation, anything at all, that I would rather not have a local authority figure looking into, even casually, even by accident. It was the right question. It was the question that, depending on the answer, changed everything about what needed to happen next. I looked at Webb for a long moment. And then I told him the thing I had not told anyone since I moved here. The real reason the invisibility mattered. The thing that was not in any public military record, not accessible through any database a curious commenter could reach, but that would become very relevant very quickly if Raymond Decker Sr. started making the kind of phone calls that went beyond the local level. Webb listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, "We need to get ahead of this tonight." Getting ahead of it, in practice, meant making a phone call I had been hoping to never make. I keep a number written on a piece of paper inside the back cover of a field manual I've had since 2003. Not stored in any phone, not saved anywhere digital, written in pencil, in a shorthand that would mean nothing to anyone who didn't already know what they were looking at. The number belongs to a man I will call by his first name only, Paul, who works in a capacity I won't specify, for an agency I won't name, in a building I visited twice in my life and would rather not visit again. Paul is the kind of contact that people in certain lines of work maintain the way you maintain a fire extinguisher. You hope you never need it. You make absolutely sure it still works. The real reason the invisibility mattered, the thing I told Webb in that garage, the thing I had told no one in 6 years, was that I had been a material witness to something during my final deployment that resulted in an ongoing federal proceeding. Not criminal, on my part. I was a witness, not a subject. But the nature of what I had witnessed and who the other parties involved were meant that my location and identity were the kind of information that certain people had demonstrated a willingness to pursue through channels that had nothing to do with due process. There had been an incident 18 months after I separated from the Marines. A man I didn't recognize showed up at the apartment I was living in at the time, in a city I had only been in for 4 months, asking questions he had no obvious way of knowing to ask. I left the next morning. I moved 4 more times in the following 2 years before I found this town, this garage, this particular configuration of quiet. Paul knew where I was. A very small number of other people knew where I was. That was the architecture I had built, and it had held. And 40,000 strangers on a regional Facebook page being asked to identify me was a crack in the foundation that I could not afford to leave unaddressed. Webb understood immediately. He didn't ask for details he didn't need. He is that kind of person. I called Paul from Webb's phone because my own phone was a burner with no traceable registration, and Paul's number doesn't accept calls from unverified lines. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Paul asked me 3 questions, confirmed 2 things I needed confirmed, and told me he would make contact with the platform by morning. He also said something that I did not expect. He said the proceeding I had witnessed for had concluded 4 months ago. Sealed outcome, no public record, but concluded. The threat profile in his assessment had dropped significantly. He said I had probably been safe for the better part of a year without knowing it. I stood in my garage and absorbed that for a moment. 6 years of careful architecture, and the emergency it was built for had quietly ended without anyone thinking to tell me. Paul apologized for the gap in communication. He said it in the flat, bureaucratic way of someone who understands that the apology is inadequate, but offers it anyway because it is the correct social response. I thanked him and handed the phone back to Webb. The video came down from the Facebook group by 11 o'clock that night. I don't know exactly what Paul did or who he contacted. I didn't ask. The clips disappeared, the page went quiet, and by the following morning the comment thread existed only in screenshots that a handful of people had saved and would eventually lose interest in. Raymond Decker Sr. was a different problem with a different solution. Webb called him back that same evening. I was not on the call, but Webb told me about it afterward in the kind of precise chronological detail that suggests he had been thinking carefully about how to characterize it. Webb told Raymond that he had been to the garage, that he had spoken to me, that he had a fuller picture of what had actually happened than the one Tyler's clips had provided. He told Raymond about the shove. He told Raymond about the tire iron. He told Raymond that in his professional opinion, as someone with significant experience assessing physical confrontations, his sons had been the aggressor in a situation they had created over a legitimate invoice, and that the man they had cornered had shown remarkable restraint under circumstances where many people would not have. Raymond Decker Sr. was quiet for a long time. Then he asked a question that told me Webb had been right to describe him the way he did. A man who protects his sons, not out of blindness, but out of habit. He asked whether I intended to pursue any legal action. Webb told him that was my decision to make, not his. I did not pursue legal action. The invoice was paid in full the following Monday morning. Tyler came in alone, without his brother, without his phone. He put cash on the counter, the exact amount, to the dollar, and he said 2 words, "I'm sorry." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it, and I didn't push him to. He was 25 years old, and he had spent the previous 4 days, I suspect, having a very uncomfortable series of conversations with his father and his sensei about the difference between confidence and recklessness. That process was already doing the work I would not have improved by adding legal weight to it. I gave him a receipt and told him to drive safe. He left, and the garage was quiet again. Webb and I have had coffee twice since then. Not scheduled, not regular. Both times it happened because he came in for work on his truck, and we ended up talking for longer than either of us planned. He is the same person I remember from Helmand, which is not something you can say about everyone. The years and the work and the distance from that version of yourself do things to people that aren't always recoverable. Webb recovered. He built something real. The dojo is legitimate. The teaching is good. And whatever dynamic had developed between him and the Decker brothers, the particular blind spot that forms when talented students become social satellites rather than actual practitioners, He addressed it directly after October. Marcus and Tyler still train there. That surprised me when I found out. I had assumed they would leave. But Webb told me they didn't, and when I asked him why he thought that was, he said that most people who act the way those brothers acted are not fundamentally bad. They are people who have never been shown clearly where the line is. Once someone they respect draws it without anger, without humiliation, simply as a statement of fact, this is the line, and you crossed it, a certain percentage of them find that clarifying. Marcus, in particular, apparently took it seriously. Webb said he had become a more careful student, more attentive to the gap between what he knows and what he assumes. Here is the final detail, the one I did not see coming. 3 weeks after the incident, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten, on plain paper, no return address, but I recognized the county postmark. It was from Raymond Decker Sr. Not an apology, exactly. Men of that generation and that particular stripe don't often write apologies in the conventional sense. It was more of an acknowledgement. He said he had looked into me. Not deeply, he specified, just enough to understand something of what kind of man I was and what kind of life I had led before I came here. He said his sons had been raised to respect certain things and that they had apparently forgotten, in the comfort of their current lives, what it actually looked like to meet someone who embodied those things. He said he was grateful I had not hurt them. He said it was the kind of grateful that a man doesn't forget. At the bottom of the letter, below his signature, he had written a single line that I have thought about more than I expected to. He wrote, "I don't know what you left behind to come here, but whatever it was, you chose a good place." I folded the letter and put it inside the same field manual where I keep Paul's number. Then I raised the bay door, rolled out from under a '78 Bronco I had been working on for a week, and got back to the work that keeps the world as quiet as I need it to be. Some people go looking for a fight their whole lives and never find one that means anything. Some people find one without looking, in a two-bay garage on a Thursday afternoon, and walk away understanding something they couldn't have articulated before it happened. I don't know which category the Decker brothers will end up in, but I know which one I'm in. I decided that a long time ago, in a country far from here, with grease-stained hands and a very different kind of weight on them. The garage still has the same name on the sign. The hydraulic lift is the same one. The quiet is the same quiet. It's just that now it belongs a little more completely to me. There is a version of this story that people want when they hear the broad strokes of it. They want the confrontation to have been bigger. They want the part where I demonstrated something physical, where the training became visible in a way that left no room for interpretation. They want the movie version, where the quiet veteran finally gets cornered and the antagonists discover their mistake in a way that is unambiguous and immediate and satisfying in the clean, cinematic sense of the word. That version didn't happen, and I think the fact that it didn't is the most important part of the story. What actually happened is that two young men with real training and a genuine sense of entitlement backed themselves into a corner they couldn't see. What stopped them was not a demonstration of force. It was a man they trusted, their teacher, their sensei. A person who had spent decades learning when to apply pressure and when to release it, walking through a door and recognizing, in an instant, that they were in a situation their skills had not prepared them for. Not because I was a weapon waiting to discharge, but because Webb understood something about the space between capability and restraint that his students were still learning. That gap between what a person is capable of and what they choose to do is where character actually lives. Not in the trophies, not in the belt color, not in the clips posted to social media or the reputation built in a room full of people who already agree with you. In the gap, in the moment when every option is available and you choose the one that requires the most from you. I've been thinking about Raymond Decker's letter, the line at the bottom of it. Whatever you left behind to come here, you chose a good place. He wrote that not knowing what I had actually left behind, which means he wrote it as a general truth about the visible thing, a man who came somewhere quiet and stayed quiet. But I think it lands differently now that I know the emergency is over. Now that the structure I built to protect a specific fear has outlasted the thing it was built to protect. Maybe the place you build when you're running from something is still worth keeping when you're not running anymore. Maybe quiet chosen in fear becomes quiet chosen in peace. And the difference between those two things is less important than people think. I don't have a clean moral to hand you. What I have is a garage, a hydraulic lift, and an invoice that was paid in full. That's enough. If this story sat with you, leave a comment with your thoughts. I read every one. If you want more stories like this one, subscribe and stay close. There's always another door worth walking through.